Dr. Marcus Grant snatched the clipboard out of Maya Taylor's hands in front of the entire trauma unit, threw it onto the floor, and laughed. "Who let the church volunteer into my ER?" he said loud enough for every nurse, every orderly, every single person in that hallway to hear. Maya stood there, 27 years old, first week on the job, bags still under her eyes from the overnight drive to San Diego, and she did not flinch. She picked up that clipboard. She said nothing. And every person who watched that moment thought the same thing: this poor girl has no idea what she walked into. They were wrong. They had no idea what had just walked into them. If this story hits you somewhere deep, please subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling us what city you are watching from right now. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The night Maya Taylor showed up at Captain Ethan Carter's front door, she had 3 bags with her: a hospital ID badge still clipped to her scrubs, and a piece of paper with an address written in a woman's shaking handwriting. She had driven 40 minutes from St. Helena Military Hospital to a quiet street in Coronado, California, with nothing but that address and the weight of something she could not put down. She stood on the porch and knocked. She heard nothing for a long moment, then footsteps, heavy ones. The kind that belonged to someone who has spent years learning how to move without making a sound and has forgotten how. The door opened. Ethan Carter stood there in a gray t-shirt and sweatpants, 6 feet 2 inches of a man who looked like he had been fighting sleep and losing badly. There was a long scar running from his collarbone up toward his jaw that Maya had not seen when he was unconscious on her table 2 weeks ago, because back then his chest had been open and her hands had been inside it. He stared at her. She stared back. "Your mom gave me this address," Maya said. Ethan blinked, his jaw tightened. "My mom. She called the hospital. She said she was worried about you. She said you hadn't answered the phone in 11 days. Maya shifted the heaviest bag on her shoulder. "She said if anybody had any decency left, they would check on you in person. So," she held up the child slightly, "I brought food, and I'm a nurse, so if you slam the door in my face, that's your choice, but I'm going to feel pretty bad about it on the drive home." Ethan looked at her for another long moment. Then he looked at the mouse, then back at her face. "You were at the hospital," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "You were in the OR." "Yes." Something moved behind his eyes, not gratitude, not yet. Something more complicated than that. Something that looked almost like embarrassment, or maybe anger, the kind that has no clear target. "I didn't ask anyone to check on me," he said. "I know," Maya said. "Your mom did." She watched him process that. She watched the way his shoulders dropped, just barely, the way a man who has been trained to hold everything up finally notices the ache in his arms. He stepped back from the door. Not an invitation, not a welcome, just a step back. She walked in. The inside of Ethan Carter's house told her more in 10 seconds than any medical chart had told her in 2 weeks. There were dishes in the sink that had been there long enough to matter. There were physical therapy instructions on the kitchen counter, still folded, still in the envelope they had been sent in. There was a bottle of pain medication on the table with the safety seal still on it, which meant either he was tougher than any human being had a right to be, or he was suffering in silence out of sheer stubbornness. She put the bags down on the counter without asking permission. "You don't have to do this," Ethan said from behind her. "I know," she said again. "I'm fine." She turned around and looked at him directly the way she had learned to look at things that were clearly not what they were claiming to be. "Captain Carter, I have been a nurse for 2 weeks, and before that I spent 6 years doing things I am not going to talk about tonight. I have sat next to a lot of people who told me they were fine." She paused. "You don't look fine." He opened his mouth. She turned back to the counter. "Sit down. I'm making you something to eat. And before you say you're not hungry, I want you to think about the last actual meal you had and whether it counts." There was a silence behind her that lasted long enough that she genuinely didn't know what he was going to do. Then she heard the sound of a chair being pulled out from the kitchen table and the slow, careful way a man with healing chest wounds lowers himself into it. She started unpacking the bags. She had been working the trauma unit at St. Helena for exactly 14 days when she met Ethan Carter, and in those 14 days she had learned 3 things with absolute certainty. The first was that Dr. Marcus Grant was the kind of man who had been given authority early and had mistaken that for intelligence. The second was that the trauma unit really ran on the backs of the nurses and the orderlies and the people whose names nobody bothered to learn. And the third was that she was going to have to be very, very careful about how much of herself she showed in that building. She had chosen quiet on purpose. She had come to St. Helena with a plan that looked simple on paper: leave the military, get a nursing degree, do the work, help people, stay invisible. She had spent 6 years as a Green Beret medic, doing things that had saved lives and cost her sleep and left marks on her that no one who looked at her scrubs and her soft voice would ever think to look for. She wasn't running from that. She was just ready to stop being defined by it. But quiet has a cost. Quiet looks like weakness to people who have never needed it to survive. She had found that out on her very first shift. Dr. Marcus Grant had walked into the nursing station at 6 in the morning, taken one look at Maya standing there reviewing a patient's chart, and said, "Who approved the volunteer, the charge nurse, a woman named Linda Shores, who had been at St. Helena for 18 years and had the face of someone who had seen every variation of bad behavior and given up being surprised by it, had said, 'Dr. Grant, this is Maya Taylor. She's the new trauma nurse. Started Monday.'" Grant had looked at Maya the way you look at furniture someone has moved without asking you. "Trauma unit," he said. "You sure about that?" Maya had said, "Yes, sir. Quite sure." He had laughed, not the kind of laugh that has any humor in it, the kind that is a message. "Sir," he repeated, looking around at the other staff. She said, "Sir, that's adorable." He had taken the chart out of her hands, looked at it, handed it back. "Stick to vitals, sweetheart. Leave the thinking to the people who went to medical school." And he had walked away. Linda had looked at Maya with an expression that said she was sorry, and also that there was nothing she was prepared to do about it. And Maya had said nothing because she had known that the moment she said something, the moment she pushed back, she would become a problem instead of a person, and she was not ready for that yet. She had been not ready for it every day for 2 weeks. Grant called her the ghost because she was quiet. He called her the trainee in front of patients, which was not only inaccurate, but genuinely harmful to patient confidence. He second-guessed every assessment she made, not because her assessments were wrong, because they never were, but because second-guessing her was a way of reminding everyone in the room that he could. He was the kind of man who needed an audience for his cruelty, and the trauma unit gave him one every single day. Maya had taken it. She had taken it because she was new, because she needed this job, because leaving the military had meant leaving behind a certain kind of protection, and she was still figuring out what she was allowed to be in this civilian world. She had taken it because she understood in a way she wished she didn't, that some battles are not worth the cost of fighting them. And then Ethan Carter had come through those doors. It had been 11 days into her time at St. Helena, a Tuesday night, that had already been bad before it became catastrophic. There had been a multi-car accident on Interstate 5 that had sent 4 people in at once, and the unit was stretched, and Grant had been on his 3rd cup of coffee and his worst mood of the week, which was saying something. Maya had been managing the second accident victim, a 40-year-old man with 3 broken ribs and a lacerated spleen, when the radio had crackled and the paramedics had called in a Special Forces casualty name and rank, withheld critical condition gunshot wound to the chest, estimated arrival 4 minutes. Grant had straightened up like a man who had just been handed an audience. "All right, people," he had said with the kind of energy that Maya recognized as performance. "Let's show the Navy what a real trauma unit looks like." The doors had burst open 3 minutes and 40 seconds later. Ethan Carter had been on that gurney, barely looking like a man who was going to be alive in another hour. His skin was the color of old concrete. His breathing was shallow and irregular. There were 2 gunshot wounds to the chest upper left quadrant, and the paramedics were reading out vitals that didn't add up in a way that should have set off every alarm in the room. Maya had moved to his side automatically. She had checked his pulse, looked at his eyes, looked at the entry wound, angles, and she had known. She had known in the same place she always knew, things the place behind her sternum that had been calibrated by years of field medicine, in places where being wrong meant someone died. She had known before anyone else in that room had finished arguing about it. There was something wrong with the blood pressure readings. They were too stable. Not stable in the way a healthy person is stable, but stable in the way a body is stable when it has gone somewhere past pain and is doing something quiet and terrible on the inside. She had seen it twice in the field. Both times the soldier had died if no one acted in the next few minutes. She had said, Dr. Grant, I think there's a hemothorax developing on the right side. The vitals don't match the wound pattern. We need to. Grant had looked at her the way he always looked at her. I didn't ask you, he said. I know, but Taylor, his voice had been flat and final. Step back. She had stepped back. She had watched him work for 90 seconds, telling herself he would see it. He had to see it. He was an experienced trauma surgeon, and he would catch what she was seeing, and it would be fine. She had watched the monitor. She had watched Ethan Carter's oxygen saturation drop 2 points. Then another point. She had said, his sats are dropping. I can read a monitor, Grant had said. Another point. Dr. Grant, I really think. One more word, Grant had said, turning to look at her with something in his eyes that was past annoyance and into something uglier. And I will have you removed from this room. Are we clear? The room had gone very quiet. Maya had felt every eye in that unit on her. She had felt the weight of 2 weeks of accumulated humiliation pressing down on her shoulders. She had felt the very reasonable fear that if she pushed back right now in front of everyone, she would be disciplined, possibly fired, definitely marked as a problem, and the career she had worked so hard to build in this new life would crack before it had a chance to hold. She had felt all of that. And then she had looked at Ethan Carter's face, gray and still on that table, and she had thought about a night in a place she didn't say the name of out loud anymore, when a man had looked at her with that same gray stillness, and she had listened to someone who outranked her, and that man had not made it. She had made a decision. I'm sorry, she said, and she stepped forward, and she put her hands on the patient, and she started to work. Taylor, Grant's voice went up. What do you think you are doing? I told you to step back. Someone get her out of... He has a tension pneumothorax developing on the right, Maya said, and her voice was completely level, the way it got when everything around her was falling apart and her brain went quiet and her hands took over. The trachea has started to deviate. You can feel it. If you touch right here, you can feel it. I need a 14-gauge needle, and I need it right now, and I need someone to call for a chest tube tray, and I need you. She looked at Grant directly. To let me work, because if you don't, he is going to arrest in the next 4 minutes, and we will have lost him. Grant stared at her. The monitor alarm started. Ethan Carter's oxygen saturation hit 82. Someone put a needle in Maya's hand. She didn't look to see who. She positioned it, she inserted it, and she heard the hiss of air releasing the sound that meant she had been right. The sound that in field medicine meant someone was going to live who hadn't been going to live 60 seconds ago. The monitor steadied. The room was completely silent. Grant stood there with his hands at his sides, and his face had an expression on it that Maya didn't look at too closely because she had done what she needed to do, and she was not interested in his feelings about it right now. Chest tube tray, she said quietly to the nearest nurse. And I need him moved to imaging because I want to see what else is in there. Nobody argued. She worked for the next 40 minutes in a kind of focused silence that she recognized from another life, the part of her that had been trained to shut out everything except the task, the patient, the tools in her hands. When Ethan Carter's vitals finally stabilized into something real and sustainable, she stepped back from the table, and she was breathing harder than she wanted to be, her hands slightly shaky in the way they got when the adrenaline started to release. She became aware that the entire room was looking at her. Dr. Grant had not moved from where he was standing. He had not helped. He had not hindered. He had stood at the edge of the controlled chaos of the last 40 minutes like a man watching something he didn't have a category for. Linda Shores was the one who finally spoke. She said quietly from somewhere to Maya's left, "Good catch, Taylor." And Maya nodded once, pulled off her gloves, and went to write up her notes like nothing had happened. But something had happened. She knew it. Every person in that room knew it. And the knowledge sat in her chest on the drive home that night, not like triumph, but like a stone she was going to have to carry for a while because she had broken something in that room. Some balance of power that Grant had been maintaining for a very long time. And those things didn't break quietly. That had been 11 days ago. In the kitchen of Ethan Carter's house in Coronado, she set a plate of food in front of him and sat down across the table with her own cup of coffee, and for a few minutes neither of them said anything. She watched him eat, not hovering, not performing care, just being present, the way she had learned to be present with people who were hurting and didn't know how to ask for anything. "How did you know?" he said finally. She looked up. "In the OR," he said. He wasn't looking at her, he was looking at his plate. The other doctor had already called it. He had already decided. How did you know he was wrong? Maya wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. She was quiet for a moment, picking through the answer for the version of the truth she was ready to give. I've seen it before, she said carefully. The presentation, the way the vitals plateau right before everything goes wrong. I recognized it. He looked up at her then, and the look on his face was the look of a man who knows there is more to a sentence than what was said, who has spent years in rooms where people say one thing and mean another, and has learned to hear the difference. Where, he said. She met his eyes. Somewhere that doesn't have a name I can use in polite conversation, she said. Something shifted in his expression. Something that was not quite recognition, but was close to it. He nodded slowly, the way you nod when someone has just told you something without telling you anything, and you have decided to respect the boundary. The Navy is going to send someone to debrief me next week, he said. About the operation. I know, Maya said. You should probably be sleeping and eating real food before that happens. I've been briefed on worse conditions. I don't doubt it. She stood up and took her cup to the sink. But you don't have to be. She heard him shift in his chair behind her. She heard the small, careful movement of a man whose chest was still healing, who had been told to rest and had been doing anything but. Why did you really come? He said. She stood at the sink for a moment. Outside the window, the street was quiet and dark and ordinary, in the way that civilian streets were ordinary, the kind of ordinary she had chosen on purpose, and was still some days learning to trust. Your mom sounded scared, she said, and I know what it's like to be the person no one checks on. She turned around. He was watching her with that same look, the one that saw more than it said. You can sleep in the guest room if you want, he said. It's late. The drive back is going to be bad. She considered it. I'll take the couch, she said. I sleep light, old habit. He didn't ask why. She thought that was the right answer about him. She settled on the couch with a blanket she found in the hall closet, and she lay there in the dark of a stranger's house, listening to the sounds of a neighborhood that did not know it was sheltering two people who had each survived something no one in it would fully understand. And she thought about the week ahead and the debrief he mentioned, and the way Grant had looked at her in the hospital the day after the OR, the way a man looks when he has started to build a plan. She thought about the phone call she had gotten that afternoon from the hospital administrator's office, requesting her presence at a meeting she had not been told the reason for. She thought about the piece of paper still in her pocket with Ethan Carter's address on it, and the way his mother's voice had sounded on the phone, shaking and grateful and frightened, saying, please, he won't answer, he won't talk to anyone, he's alone in that house, and I'm 3,000 miles away, and I don't know what to do. Maya had known what to do. She had always known what to do with that particular kind of quiet, the quiet that is not peace but something pretending to be peace, the quiet that breaks things from the inside. She closed her eyes. In the back bedroom, she could hear Ethan Carter stop moving around. She could hear the house settle. She could hear faintly the sound of his breathing slow and even out, and she recognized the particular quality of it, the breathing of someone who had not actually slept in a long time and had just finally, for reasons neither of them would have been able to explain, let themselves. She pulled the blanket up. Tomorrow she had a meeting at the hospital she didn't have enough information about. Tomorrow Grant would be there with that look on his face. Tomorrow there would be another shift, another set of people in pain, another set of decisions that would matter more than most people in that building would ever know. But tonight the house was quiet, and for the first time in 11 days, Maya Taylor let herself feel the full weight of what she had done in that OR. Not the fear of it, not the cost of it, but the simple, undecorated fact of it. She had walked into a room where someone had already made a decision, and she had made a different one, and Ethan Carter was alive. She thought about his mother's shaking handwriting on that piece of paper. She thought about the way he had lowered himself into that chair like a man who had forgotten he was allowed to sit down. She thought about all the things neither of them had said, and she thought some stories don't start with a rescue. Some of them start with a knock on a door. Some of them start with 3 bags and a long drive, and a woman who knows what it looks like when someone is not fine and decides quietly without being asked, without any promise of a reward to show up anyway. The street outside was silent. Maya closed her eyes and did not dream. She was back at St. Helena by 6:45 in the morning, still in yesterday's scrubs, coffee in one hand, and her badge in the other. And the first person she saw when she walked through the staff entrance was Linda Shores, who took one look at her and said, "The administrator wants you at 8. Grant is already in his office. Whatever is happening today, it started before you got here." Maya said thank you and kept walking. She had 45 minutes. She used 20 of them to change into fresh scrubs from her locker 10, to eat something from the vending machine that she would not remember the taste of, and the remaining 15 to sit in the break room with her coffee and think through every possible version of the meeting that was waiting for her. None of the versions were good. She had known from the moment she stepped forward in that OR 11 days ago that there would be a cost. That was not naivety. She had simply decided in that specific moment that the cost was acceptable. But knowing a price is coming and standing at the register are two different things, and she sat in that break room, and she breathed the way she had been taught to breathe in situations where the outcome was not in her control, and the only variable she owned was herself. In 4 counts. Hold 4 counts. Out 4 counts. She had done this in worse places. She could do it here. At 2 minutes to 8, she walked to the administrator's office on the 3rd floor. The door was already open. Administrator Douglas Hale was a man in his early 60s who looked like he had spent most of those years learning how to make uncomfortable things sound procedural. He was sitting behind a desk that was very clean, which Maya had learned meant he was preparing for something he didn't want a paper trail for. Sitting in the chair to his right, in his white coat with his arms crossed, was Dr. Marcus Grant. He looked like a man who had spent the night preparing for exactly this. Hale gestured to the chair across from him. "Nurse Taylor, thank you for coming in." Maya sat. "We wanted to address what happened in the OR 11 days ago," Hale said. "All right," Maya said. Grant shifted in his chair. He said, "I'm going to be direct. What you did was insubordinate. It was dangerous, and it was outside the scope of your role as a floor nurse. You are not a surgeon. You are not a physician. And you intervened in a procedure over the explicit objection of the attending physician." Maya looked at him for a moment. "The patient is alive," she said. "That is not the point," Grant said, and his voice had the tight, controlled quality of someone who had been practicing this sentence. "The point is that you don't have the authority to override a doctor's decision in this unit. If I had been wrong, we have protocols. We have chains of command. You don't get to decide on your own that you know better." "I inserted a needle," Maya said. "I decompressed a tension pneumothorax. His oxygen saturation was at 82 and dropping. You acted without authorization. He was going to arrest. You don't know that?" And there it was. That sentence sitting in the air between them, the sentence that required her to either back down or say something she could not unsay. She looked at Grant's face and she saw very clearly that he knew. He knew she had been right. He had known it standing in that room while she worked and the monitor steadied and every person around him watched a rookie nurse do something he had refused to do. He had known it for 11 days and it had been sitting in him like a piece of glass, and this meeting was the only way he knew how to remove it. Maya said very quietly, "Yes, I do." The room was completely still. Hale cleared his throat. "Nurse Taylor, I want to be fair here. The patient outcome was positive. No one is disputing that. But Dr. Grant has raised a valid concern about protocol compliance, and we have an obligation to address that." He opened a folder on his desk. "We're going to need to place a formal letter of reprimand in your file." Maya looked at the folder. "Additionally," Hale continued, "we're recommending a 2-week reassignment to a lower acuity floor while we review the incident." Maya said nothing for a moment. She looked at the folder. She looked at Grant, who was watching her with the careful attention of a man waiting to see if he has won. She thought about the 3 bags she had left at Ethan Carter's house. She thought about his mother's shaking handwriting. She thought about the night the other soldier died at one she hadn't pushed hard enough to save because pushing had felt impossible in that moment and the cost had felt too high. She said no. Grant blinked. Hale looked up from the folder. "I'm not accepting the reassignment," Maya said, "and I want to be clear about something. I performed a needle decompression on a patient whose vitals indicated imminent cardiac arrest. I was correct. The patient survived. If the same situation happened tomorrow, I would do the same thing. If this hospital needs to put a letter in my file because I saved a patient's life, then put the letter in my file. But I'm not leaving the trauma unit." Grant stood up. "You don't get to make that decision." I'm not making a decision, Maya said. I'm telling you what happened, and I'm telling you what I would do again. Those are facts. You can do whatever you want with them. She stood up because she had learned a long time ago that the person sitting down in these conversations is the person being managed, and she was done being managed. She looked at Hale. Is there anything else? Hale opened his mouth and closed it. He looked at Grant. He looked back at Maya. He had the expression of a man who had walked into a room expecting it to be a certain shape and found it was a different shape entirely. We'll be in touch, he said. Maya nodded once and walked out. She made it to the stairwell before her hands started shaking. She stood there for a full minute, back against the wall, hands pressed flat to her thighs, breathing. Not because she was afraid of what she had just done, but because doing it had cost something, the specific kind of cost that doesn't show up until afterward, when the adrenaline drops and the body remembers it was a body, not a machine. She was still standing there when the stairwell door opened and Linda Shores came through it, looked at her, and pulled the door closed behind her without a word. They stood there together for a moment. I heard, Linda said. How? The walls in this building have ears, and most of them belong to the nursing staff. Linda leaned against the opposite wall. You know what happens now, right? He starts looking for reasons, Maya said. He has been looking for reasons since the night you touched that patient. You just made it urgent. Linda crossed her arms. How long have you actually been a nurse? Maya looked at her. Not in total, Linda said. I mean here, in a hospital, in a civilian setting. 2 weeks. Linda let out a slow breath. Okay, and before that? Maya said nothing. Right, Linda said. That's what I thought. She pushed off the wall. Listen to me. Grant is going to document every single thing you do for the next month. Every note you write, every order you question, every time you so much as look at a chart too long. He is going to build a case, and he is going to use it. So whatever it is you did before this, wherever it is you came from, you need to decide right now how much of it you're willing to show, because invisible is not an option anymore. Maya looked at the floor. Then she looked up. I don't want to be invisible, she said. I just wanted to be a nurse. Linda looked at her for a moment with an expression that was softer than anything Maya had seen from her in 2 weeks. Honey, she said, you were never just going to be a nurse. You have to know that. Linda pushed through the door and was gone. Maya stood alone in the stairwell for another 30 seconds. Then she straightened up, took one last breath, and went back to work. The shift that day was the most watched shift of Maya's short career at St. Helena. She felt it from the moment she stepped onto the floor. The nurses were quieter around her, not cold, but careful. The way people are careful around someone who has just done something brave, and they aren't sure yet what it is going to cost everyone. The orderlies found reasons to be nearby. 2 of the residents she had never spoken to found reasons to make eye contact and nod, which was not much, but was something. Grant was on the floor for 4 of the 8 hours. He did not speak to her directly. He spoke around her through other staff about her patients loudly enough that she could hear every word and quietly enough that she couldn't call it what it was. When she caught a medication error in a chart at hour 3, she corrected it and documented it the way she always did, and she felt him watching from across the nurses' station without looking up. At noon, she stepped outside for 7 minutes. Her phone buzzed while she was standing there. It was a number she didn't recognize. She answered. Taylor, said a voice she did recognize, low and careful, and still slightly rough around the edges from 2 weeks of not quite enough healing. Ethan Carter. Captain Carter, she said, I found your number in the discharge papers. The hospital contact list. A pause. I wanted to say thank you for last night. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. Another pause, and this one had something in it, a weight, the kind of weight that belongs to a man who doesn't say things easily and is choosing to say them anyway. I slept. That was the first time I've actually slept since they brought me in. Maya looked at the sky. It was a clear, flat blue. I'm glad, she said. There's something I need to tell you, he said, and the quality of his voice shifted in a way that made her straighten up slightly. The debrief next week. I asked my CO about the operation, the circumstances of my injury. He stopped. And, Maya said, the location we were at wasn't supposed to be a hot zone. It was supposed to be a routine extraction. Someone told someone something they shouldn't have. He said it carefully, like a man reading from a document he isn't sure he's allowed to share. There's an inquiry open, low profile, internal. Maya processed this. Why are you telling me? Because they asked about the hospital, he said. They asked who had access to my records, my location, who knew I was at St. Helena. The back of her neck went cold. She said, "What are you saying?" "I'm saying, be careful," he said. "I'm saying whatever is in your personnel file, whatever is in your background, make sure it's something you're comfortable with people looking at, because people are going to look." She thought about the file, the parts that were redacted, the parts that were sealed, the parts that were not technically accessible to a hospital administrator conducting a routine personnel review, but would be accessible to someone who knew what they were looking for and who to ask. "How long have you known something like this was coming?" she said. "I've suspected since I woke up," he said. "The injury pattern was wrong, the timing was wrong, and the people who came to my room before I was discharged were asking questions that didn't match the answers they said they wanted." Maya stood outside St. Helena Military Hospital in San Diego in her scrubs in the clear flat blue of the afternoon, and she understood with a very specific kind of clarity that the thing she had been trying to leave behind had not in fact left her. "I have to go back inside," she said. "I know," he said. "Taylor." He stopped again. When he spoke again, he said, "You walked into a room 11 days ago and made a call that you were the only person in there qualified to make. I have been trying to figure out how to say this without it sounding like a line, but I don't have a better way to say it than this. I would like to know you. Not the nurse, the person who walked into that room." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a complicated request," she said. "I know. I'll think about it." She went back inside. The next 3 hours were ordinary in the external sense and not ordinary at all in any other sense. Maya moved through her patients with the focus she always brought, checked her charting twice, said nothing to Grant when he stood at the edge of her sightline with the expression of a man collecting evidence. She was professionally unreachable, which she knew would frustrate him, because the behavior he could build a case out of was the behavior she would never give him. At 4 in the afternoon, she was at the nurse's station reviewing a post-op patient's chart when the ER doors opened and 2 men in civilian clothes walked to the front desk and asked quietly for the hospital administrator. They were not patients. They were not family members. She could tell by the way they moved, by the way one of them positioned himself facing the door, while the other spoke by the particular quality of their stillness, which was not the stillness of people waiting, but the stillness of people watching. She had known people who moved like that. She had been a person who moved like that. Linda appeared at her elbow. "You see them?" "Yes," Maya said. "They've been here before," Linda said very quietly, not looking at Maya, looking at the chart in her hand. "Last week, Tuesday, they asked about Captain Carter's treatment records." Maya kept her eyes on the chart in front of her. "What did Hale tell them?" "He told them to come back with the proper authorization." "Apparently they got it." She turned a page. "They're going to ask about the OR. They're going to ask who made the call." Maya said nothing. "They're going to ask about you," Linda said. At 6:45, Maya was called to Hale's office again. She went. The 2 men in civilian clothes were introduced as consultants, which was the word people used when they didn't want to say the actual word. They were polite. They were thorough. They asked her to walk them through the events of the night Ethan Carter was brought in, and she did, and they asked questions that were framed to sound like clarifications, but were actually aimed at 2 specific things: what she had known and when she had known it, and whether she had told anyone outside the hospital about Captain Carter's condition before or after his treatment. She answered every question the way she had been trained to answer questions like these, which was to give the truth and only the truth and precisely the truth, no more and no less, in a tone that communicated complete cooperation and revealed absolutely nothing that wasn't directly asked. When they were done, one of them looked at her for a moment in the way those people look at things they are still deciding about. He said, "Your background check cleared when you were hired." It was not a question. "Yes," Maya said. "Routine check," he said. "Standard for hospital employment." "That's my understanding," Maya said. He nodded slowly. "Thank you for your time, Nurse Taylor." She walked out of Hale's office, and she did not look back, and she did not let the feeling in her chest find her face until she was in the parking garage, with her back against her car and her eyes closed and the solid steel of it behind her holding her up because something was happening here, something that was not random and was not coincidental, and she had exactly one person in her life right now who might understand what it was. She got in her car. She drove back to Coronado. Ethan Carter opened the door before she knocked. He had heard the car. Of course he had. She stood on the porch with the night coming in behind her, and she said, "You told me to be careful. I need you to tell me what that actually means, all of it. Because I just sat in a room with two people who were not consultants, and they asked me questions that were not about the OR." Ethan stepped back from the door. She walked in. He said, "How much do you know about what my team was extracting?" "Nothing," she said. "Good," he said. "Keep it that way." He moved to the kitchen table and sat down carefully the way he had last night, and he looked at her with the expression she was starting to recognize as his honest face, the one underneath the one he showed people by default. "There is a name," he said, "an asset, someone who was pulled out of a very bad situation 6 weeks ago, someone whose identity is sealed above my clearance level. All I know is that when my team went back to the extraction point to recover equipment, we were ambushed by people who knew exactly where we were going to be. And someone told them," Maya said. "Someone told them," he said, "and whoever that someone is, they are still in a position where they can access information, including information about who saved my life and what they might know." Maya sat down across from him. "I don't know anything," she said. "I know that," he said. "They don't know that yet." She looked at him. She thought about Grant. She thought about the folder on Hale's desk. She thought about the part of her file that was not accessible on a standard background check, and what would happen if the right people started asking the right questions about a nurse at a military hospital who had moved with the speed and precision of someone with a very specific set of skills and saved the life of a special forces commander. She thought about the quiet life she had built out of nothing and packed into 3 bags and driven to San Diego with the life that was supposed to be small and safe and away from exactly this. She said, "I am going to need you to be honest with me about everything, not about what you're cleared to share. Everything." He looked at her for a long time. He said, "Yeah, I think you're right." Outside, the street was dark and quiet the way it had been the night before, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was the quiet before something, not the quiet after. Maya could feel it the way she had always felt these things in the back of her chest, in the part of her that had never fully left the field, even when the rest of her was trying. She was a nurse. She had chosen that. But something had chosen her too, and it was sitting across from her at a kitchen table in Coronado, California, with healing chest wounds and honest eyes, and whatever was coming was already on its way. Ethan talked for 2 hours. He talked the way men like him talk when they finally decide to talk, not easily, not smoothly, but with the particular weight of someone who has been carrying something in silence for long enough that putting it into words feels like pulling something out of the ground with bare hands. He told her about the operation. Not the classified parts, the parts he said were above both of their clearances, but the shape of it, the edges of it, the things that had felt wrong before they went wrong. Maya listened without interrupting. She had learned that from years in the field, the discipline of letting someone finish, of not filling silences with her own assumptions. She sat at that kitchen table in Coronado, and she listened to Ethan Carter describe a mission that had gone sideways in a way that was too precise to be accidental, and by the time he was done, she had a picture in her head that she didn't like at all. "The ambush was waiting for us," he said, "not positioned to intercept, positioned to receive. There's a difference. When someone is intercepting, they set up a wide net. When they're receiving, they set up exactly where they need to be, and they wait." He looked at his hands. They were waiting, which means whoever told them had your exact coordinates and your exact timeline, Maya said. "Yes. And that information would have come from inside your command structure, or from someone with access to it." He looked up. "The inquiry is internal right now. That's the problem. It's being run by the same structure that might have the leak, and the people running it are very motivated to find the leak before anyone outside the chain of command hears about it." Maya looked at him. Motivated to find it or motivated to contain it? He was quiet for a moment. "That's the question, isn't it?" She got up and poured herself a glass of water. She stood at the sink and drank it, and thought about the two men in Hale's office, the ones who called themselves consultants. She thought about the specific way they had phrased their questions, the architecture of what they were actually trying to find out. She put the glass down. They weren't investigating the OR, she said. They were investigating me. Yes, Ethan said. They wanted to know if I had a reason to be there. Beyond the obvious one. They wanted to know who you are, he said, because someone who moves the way you moved in that or who knows what you knew in that moment is not a 2-week nurse. And a 2-week nurse who happens to be working at the exact hospital where a compromised special forces commander gets brought in is a coincidence that people in that world don't believe in. Maya turned around and looked at him. I was assigned to St. Helena through a standard nursing placement. I went through the hiring process like anyone else. I know that, he said, but knowing that and being able to prove that to someone who doesn't want to believe it are two different things. She had known this. She had known it abstractly, the way you know things when you're building a new life, and you've been very careful and you trust the structure you built. But hearing it said out loud in a kitchen at 11 o'clock at night, with the weight of what had happened in the last 48 hours sitting on the table between them, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. She sat back down. My file is sealed, she said, the relevant parts. Sealed files get unsealed, Ethan said, especially when the right people decide they need to look. And the right people are currently motivated. Very. She looked at the table for a moment. Then she said, what do you need from me? He blinked. I'm not asking you for anything. I know you're not asking. I'm asking what you need. She looked at him directly. You didn't call me today to warn me out of generosity. You called me because you needed someone in that building you could trust. Someone who could see things without being told what to look for. She paused. I'm right, aren't I? He looked at her for a long time. There's someone in that hospital, he said quietly. I don't know who. I don't know their role, but someone in that building passed information, and they are still in that building, and the inquiry doesn't have the access it needs to find them without tipping them off. He folded his hands on the table. I need eyes. From inside. From someone who is already there, and already watching, and who knows what they're actually looking at. Maya breathed in slowly. She had come to San Diego to be a nurse. She had packed 3 bags and driven down the coast and walked into St. Helena Military Hospital with a plan that was supposed to be quiet and small and far away from this exact kind of conversation. She had chosen it deliberately. She had earned the right to choose it. And sitting across from this man with his healing chest and his honest face, she felt the pull of something she had tried very hard to put down, the pull of being needed in the specific way that only a specific kind of person can be needed. She said, if I do this, I need you to be completely straight with me. Every step. No information that's conveniently withheld for my protection. No decisions made on my behalf without my knowledge. I spent 6 years in a structure where that was the operating mode, and I left it because I was done with it. Understood, he said without hesitation. And I'm still a nurse, she said. My patients come first. Always. Whatever this is, it does not compromise the care I give in that unit. I wouldn't ask you to compromise that. I know, she said. I'm telling you anyway. He nodded. She said, tell me who I'm looking for. The next morning, she walked into St. Helena at 6:50 earlier than usual, and she went straight to the nurse's station and pulled up the access log for Captain Carter's treatment records. This was not unusual. Nurses reviewed patient records regularly, and Carter was technically still in the system as a recent discharge with ongoing outpatient notes. She was not looking at the records. She was looking at who else had looked at the records and when. The access log showed 11 separate views of Carter's file in the 14 days since his admission. 7 of those were attributable to members of the direct treatment team. 2 were administrative flagged as part of the standard discharge process. 1 was her own from 2 days after the OR when she had checked his post-op notes. The 11th access was from a workstation on the 2nd floor at 2:17 in the morning, 4 days after Carter's discharge. The user credential attached to it was a Dr. Stephen Rowe, a hospitalist, who worked the 2nd floor night rotation and had no documented clinical involvement with Captain Carter at any point during his stay. Maya looked at that entry for a long time. Then she closed the log and went to start her shift. She did not tell anyone what she had found. Not yet. She needed to understand the shape of it before she moved, because the worst thing she could do right now was spook whoever this was with a premature move. She had learned that in the field. The animal that knows it's being watched behaves differently than the animal that doesn't. You watch first. You understand the pattern. You move when you understand the whole thing, not the part of it you can see. At 9 in the morning, Grant called her into a patient room for a case consult, which was unusual enough that she noticed it. He wanted her to review a post-surgical patient's pain management notes. She reviewed them. They were fine. She said so. He looked at her. He said, "You've been here less than 3 weeks." "Yes," she said, "and you've managed to make enemies in the administration, attract the attention of 2 federal consultants, and become the personal on-call nurse for a special forces patient who is no longer even in this hospital." He paused. That's a lot of noise for someone who wants to be a quiet floor nurse. She looked at him steadily. "Is there a patient concern you want to discuss, Dr. Grant?" His jaw tightened. "I'm trying to tell you something." "I know," she said, "but I'm not sure you're saying it directly enough for me to act on it." He looked at her for a moment, and something in his expression shifted slightly, just slightly, from the hardness she was used to seeing into something that might in another man have been the concern. He said, "Be careful what doors you open to, Taylor. Some of them don't close." She looked at him. She said, "Thank you, Dr. Grant," and she walked out. She stood in the hallway outside and thought about that for 30 seconds, because that had not been a threat. She knew what his threats sounded like. That had been something else. That had been a man who knew something and wasn't sure whether to say it, and had chosen the middle path of saying just enough to create deniability. She filed it and kept moving. At 11:15, she had her first direct encounter with Dr. Stephen Rowe. He was not what she would have expected from the access log, which she knew was her own bias. He was a slight man in his early 40s, with a mild face and the manner of someone who had learned to be easy to overlook. He was getting coffee from the break room when she walked in, and he smiled at her, the easy professional smile of a colleague, and said, "You're the new trauma nurse." "Taylor, right? I heard about the Carter case. Good save." She smiled back, equal warmth, no more, no less. "Thank you. Are you on the second floor rotation?" "Night shift mostly," he said. "The dead hours?" He poured his coffee. "Quiet work. I like it." "I can imagine," she said. He nodded pleasantly and left. She stood at the coffee machine and did not move for a few seconds. He was smooth. Not artificially smooth, not the smoothness of someone performing ease, but the genuine smoothness of someone who had been in the same professional environment for a long time and was very comfortable in it. That was harder to work with than obvious nervousness. That was someone who was not afraid of being watched. She texted Ethan from the break room. One word, a name. Stephen Rowe. His reply came back in 4 minutes. 2 words. "I know." She stared at her phone. Then she typed, "How long?" He replied, "Call me at lunch." She went back to work. At noon, standing outside in the same spot she had taken the call from him yesterday, she pressed call, and he picked up on the second ring. "Stephen Rowe has been flagged for the past 8 days," he said without preamble. He came up in a cross-reference of hospital staff with access to my records and personnel with connections to a defense contractor that was on the periphery of our operation. "You already knew," Maya said. "I suspected. I didn't have confirmation. I didn't have someone who could physically observe him in that building and tell me whether the suspicion had legs." A pause. Does it have legs? She thought about the 2:17 access time. She thought about his casual manner, the easy smile, the complete lack of any visible tension. "He accessed your file 4 days after discharge," she said. 2 in the morning. No clinical reason. He had no documented contact with you at any point during your stay. A silence on the line that had weight in it. "Maya," Ethan said, and it was the first time he had used her first name, and she noticed it without making anything of it. "That access log is exactly what the inquiry needed. Do you have the ability to document that formally? Through the hospital's own record system?" "I can pull the log and note the anomaly through standard channel," she said. "I flagged a medication error last week through the same process. It's routine documentation. It doesn't draw attention." "If you do that," he said carefully, "you are creating an official record that will be used in an active federal inquiry. That is not a small thing. That is the kind of thing that has consequences." "I know." I need you to say that you know what you're signing up for. She looked at the sky. Same flat blue as yesterday. I know what I'm signing up for, she said. I stopped pretending I didn't the moment I drove back to your house last night. He was quiet for a moment. She could hear him breathe. She thought about the way he had looked at her across that table, the honest face under the default face, the man who had said, I would like to know the person who walked into that room. Be careful today, he said. Roe is smooth. He has been in that building for 6 years and no one has looked at him sideways. Don't let him know you've seen the log. He won't know, she said. She went back inside. The afternoon was quiet in the external sense and screaming in every other. Maya moved through her patience with everything she had because that was the commitment she had made that morning out loud, and it was the commitment she made silently every time she walked through those doors. The work was real. Boy. The people in those beds were real. Whatever else was happening in the bones of this building, the woman in bed 4 with the post-op fever was real, and she needed the same Maya Taylor that everyone else got, the same focus and care and specific attention. That was the whole reason Maya had wanted this job in the first place. She documented the access log anomaly at 3:45. It was a brief note precisely worded or shabby worded attached to the patient file through the standard compliance flagging process. It would be reviewed by the compliance officer who would flag it to administration, who would send it through the hospital's reporting system. By the time it reached anyone who needed to act on it, there would be 3 institutional layers between Maya and the information, and nothing about it would look like anything other than a nurse doing her job. She was at the nurse's station reviewing discharge notes when she felt someone standing close behind her. She turned. Stephen Rowe was standing 2 feet away from her, looking at the board above the station. He was not looking at her, he had a chart in his hand. He was the picture of a man who happened to be in a place because it was a place he worked. Busy afternoon, he said mildly to no one in particular. Always, Linda said from the other end of the station. He nodded and walked away. Maya turned back to her screen. Her pulse had not changed. Her expression had not changed. But she had felt it, the specific quality of that proximity. The 2 feet that was too close without being close enough to be challenged, the casual body positioning that gave a view of what was on her screen without appearing to look. She knew that move. She had used that move. He had not seen what she was documenting. She had minimized the window before she turned. Old habit, the kind that saves you in moments you don't know are coming. But he had come to look, which meant he was watching her, which meant someone had told him to watch her. She texted Ethan one sentence. He's been told about me. The reply came back in 3 minutes. Get out of the building at normal time. Don't change your routine. I'm making calls. She looked at the phone for a moment. Then she put it in her pocket and went back to her patient in bed 4. At 5:30, Dr. Marcus Grant found her at the medication cart. He stood beside her and spoke quietly, not looking at her, pretending to review something on his own tablet. He said the 2 consultants came back this afternoon. She kept her eyes on the medication tray. I know, I saw them in the lobby. They weren't there to see Hale this time, Grant said. His voice was low and completely flat, all the performance drained out of it. They were asking about Roe. Maya's hand stayed still. They had a photograph, Grant said. They showed it to 3 people on the 2nd floor. They were asking if anyone had seen him talking to anyone outside the hospital in the past 2 weeks, anyone they didn't recognize. A pause. I don't know what is happening in this building, my Violer, and I don't think you're going to tell me. But I am telling you as the senior physician on this floor that whatever it is, it has moved into a phase that is past my ability to be irrelevant in, and I need you to understand that. She looked at him, he looked back, and she saw it, the thing she had not seen before or had seen, and dismissed in 2 weeks of being mocked and dismissed and publicly undermined. She saw that Grant was not only a man who had abused his position. He was a man who was frightened. He had been frightened since the night of Carter's surgery, and the cruelty she had taken for 2 weeks had been at least in part the cruelty of a man who had sensed that something in his domain was larger than he was prepared for and had attacked the nearest unfamiliar thing out of instinct. He was not a villain. He was a man who had found the edges of himself and didn't like what he saw there. She said quietly, "Stay away from Roe. Don't ask him questions. Don't change how you interact with him. Act normal." Grant stared at her. "Can you do that?" she said. He straightened up. He said, "Yes. She turned back to the medication cart. Behind her, she heard him walk away, and she heard the particular quality of those footsteps heavier than usual, the footsteps of a man carrying something he didn't expect to be carrying. At 6:15, she texted Ethan again. Roe knows he's being looked at. He's going to move tonight or tomorrow. The reply came back fast. I know. Stay home tonight. Don't go back to the hospital until morning. She read it twice, then she typed, What are you going to do? He replied. What needs to be done? She sat in her car in the parking garage for 3 full minutes, phone in her hand, staring at that message. She thought about every version of what those words could mean. She thought about a man with healing chest wounds who 2 days ago hadn't been sleeping or eating, who had opened a door and found her standing there, with 3 bags and no plan beyond showing up. She thought about the way he had said her first name on the phone. She thought about the quiet life she had come here to build. She thought about all the things that were now in motion, all the pieces on a board she could see most of, but not all of, and she felt the specific ancient frustration of someone who knows they are not getting the full picture and cannot afford to demand it yet. She started her car. She drove home. She did not sleep. At 2:47 in the morning, her phone rang. She had it in her hand before the first ring finished. It was Ethan. He said, Roe is gone. She sat up. Gone how? He didn't report for his shift. His car is in the hospital lot. His apartment is empty. Not cleared out, not packed, just empty, like he stepped out for something and didn't come back. A pause. The inquiry team went in 40 minutes ago. Did they get what they needed? A silence that lasted long enough to tell her the answer was complicated. They got something, he said. I don't know yet if it's enough. Another pause. Maya. The way he said her name had changed again. It had changed from the name of someone he was using to the name of someone he was worried about. There were 2 names in what they found, he said, not Roe's contacts outside the hospital. People inside it, people who had been fed information or asked to watch certain things. He stopped. Say it, she said. Your name was on the list, he said. What is someone who was complicit as a target? Someone flagged you to Roe 6 days ago. Someone in that hospital told him you were worth watching and told him why. She sat in the dark of her apartment and breathed. Who, she said. He said the name, and she understood with the specific cold clarity of someone who has been looking at something from the wrong angle and has just found the right one, that she had been right about one thing and completely wrong about another, and the combination of those 2 facts was more dangerous than either one alone. The name was Douglas Hale. Maya sat in the dark of her apartment and said nothing for a long moment. She turned the name over in her head, the way you turn a stone over in your hand, looking for the weight of it, the shape of it, the place where it fit into everything she already knew. And the terrible thing, the thing that sat in her chest like something swallowed wrong, was that it fit. It fit cleanly. It fit in a way that only things that are true fit, with that specific awful click of a piece finding its slot. Hale had run both meetings. Hale had been in the room when the consultants came. Hale had access to her personnel file, to Carter's records, to the access logs, to everything in that building that moved through administrative channels. Hale had sat across a clean desk from her and offered her a letter of reprimand with the practiced ease of a man performing a role he had performed before, and she had read it as bureaucratic cowardice and not as something more deliberate. She said, How certain is the inquiry team? Certain enough that they picked him up 40 minutes ago, Ethan said. He was at his house. He didn't run. Because he didn't know he'd been made. Because he believed the structure around him was still intact, Ethan said. Roe disappearing wasn't his call. Something spooked Roe independently, and Hale didn't have time to manage it. Maya stood up and walked to her window and stood there looking at the street below. Roe was watching me because Hale told him to, and Hale told him to because someone told Hale that I was a liability. Someone outside the hospital. Yes, Ethan said, which means Hale is not the top of this. No, he said, he is not. She pressed her hand flat against the glass. It was cold. She focused on that, the specific temperature of it, because her mind was moving very fast right now, and she needed something concrete and physical to anchor her. The name on the list, she said. The name of who flagged me to Roe, that was Hale. But the name of who told Hale I was worth flagging in the first place. Do they have that? A silence that told her everything. Not yet, Ethan said. She breathed in. Go to sleep, he said. And the way he said it was not a dismissal. It was the voice of someone who understood that rest was a tactical resource and not a luxury. I'm going to know more by 6. I'll call you. She said, be careful. He was quiet for a second. You too, he said, and hung up. She did not go to sleep. She lay down on her bed and she stared at the ceiling, and she did what she had done on 100 nights in places colder and louder and more dangerous than this apartment. She ran the information through her head in a slow, deliberate loop, not to solve it because she did not have enough pieces to solve it tonight, but to know it, to know the shape of what she was inside of so that when daylight came, she would not be surprised by anything she could have anticipated in the dark. At 4 in the morning, she gave up on rest and made coffee and sat at her kitchen table and wrote out on a piece of paper she would destroy before she left the apartment every name, every timestamp, every interaction that now looked different with Hale's name in the picture. She wrote Grant's warning to her. She wrote Rose's proximity at the nurse's station. She wrote the 2 consultants who had not been there to investigate the OR, but to investigate her. She wrote the sealed sections of her file and what someone with enough access and enough motivation could learn from them. When she was done, she sat back and looked at the paper. The one thing she could not account for was the origin point. Hale had been the conduit. Roe had been the mechanism. But someone outside the hospital had identified Maya Taylor, 2-week nurse at St. Helena, as a person worth watching. That identification had happened before Roe accessed Carter's file, which meant it had happened before Hale had any reason to look at Maya for clinical reasons, before the OR incident, before any of it, which meant someone had been watching Maya before she walked through those doors. She burned the paper over her kitchen sink. At 6:03, Ethan called. She picked up immediately. The inquiry team got Hale to talk, he said. He sounded like a man who had not slept either, and she registered that without comment. Hale's contact was a man named Garrett Fowler. He's a retired DoD contractor with current consulting relationships with 2 defense firms, one of which was peripherally connected to the operation that compromised my team. Fowler told Hale about me, Maya said. Fowler told Hale that a person using the name Maya Taylor had been placed at St. Helena with access to the trauma unit, and that this person had a background that posed a risk to ongoing interest. He told Hale to document her movements and to ensure that anyone who had been treated in his unit recently did not have extended contact with her. Maya was quiet. The language he used, Ethan said, was that you were a, quote, destabilizing asset. She had been called a lot of things in her life. She had been called timid and inexperienced, in the church volunteer, in the ghost. She had been called by names that meant things she was not allowed to repeat. Destabilizing asset was new. She thought about it for a moment, and she thought it was probably the most accurate thing anyone had called her in a long time, depending on whose stability you were talking about. Fowler knew my real background, she said. Yes. How? That, Ethan said, is what the inquiry team is currently trying to find out. Because the people who have access to your sealed file are a very short list, and Garrett Fowler should not be on it. She sat with that for a moment. The implication of it was a cold and specific thing. Someone on that list talked, she said, or someone on that list is Fowler's contact inside the chain, Ethan said, which is a different problem. She stood up. I need to go to the hospital. Maya. I know, she said. I know it's complicated, but I have patience. I have a shift that starts in 2 hours. And if I don't show up, Roe is gone, Hale is gone, and a nurse who was already flagged as a problem by the acting senior physician suddenly doesn't come to work the morning after everything falls apart. That is not a story I want to tell. He was quiet for a second. You're right, he said. Go in. But I need you to listen to me about one thing. Tell me. There will be people in that building today who know that Hale was picked up last night, and some of those people are going to be afraid. Afraid people make fast decisions. Don't let anyone put you in a room with a closed door without your explicit consent. Understood, she said. And Maya. Again, the shift in his voice. I'm coming in today. The debrief was moved up. I'll be at the hospital by 10. She paused. You're not cleared for physical activity. The debrief is sitting in a chair, not running a marathon. You have healing chest wounds. I am aware of my own chest wounds, thank you. There was something in his voice that she had not heard before, the very early edge of something that was almost not quite but almost humor. She filed it. "I'll see you at 10, he said. She got dressed and drove to St. Helena. The hospital at 7 in the morning had a different quality than it had the night before. She felt it the moment she badged through the staff entrance. There was a tension in the building that was not clinical, not the tension of emergencies and difficult cases, but the tension of people who had heard something overnight and were performing normalcy while their minds worked through it. She saw it in the way two administrators clustered near the elevator fell silent when she passed. She saw it in the charge nurse who replaced Linda on the overnight, who handed her the morning briefing without making eye contact. She went to the nurse's station and pulled up her patient list and started her morning assessments the way she always did, methodically, thoroughly, starting with the most acute and working outward. She was on her third patient, a post-surgical man named Mr. Delgado, who had been in for 48 hours and was finally turning a corner when Linda Shores walked onto the floor 40 minutes before her scheduled shift start and stood at the nurse's station with a coffee cup and an expression that said she had heard everything and was processing it in real time. Maya finished her assessment of Mr. Delgado, told him he was looking better and meant it, and walked back to the station. Linda said very quietly, "Hale." "Yes," Maya said. "I've been here for 18 years, Linda said. She said it the way you say a thing you are using as a foundation for something else. 18 years. I trained under 3 different administrators. I have seen budgets cut and rebuilt. I have seen doctors get their licenses pulled. I have seen this unit survive 2 inspections that should have shut it down." She paused. "I never made Hale for something like this." "People are good at being what they need to be," Maya said. "Is that something they taught you, wherever it was you came from?" Maya looked at her. "Does it matter?" Linda thought about it. "No," she said. "I suppose it doesn't." She sipped her coffee. "Who's running the hospital today? If Hale is gone, someone has to be acting administrator." "Deputy administrator is a woman named Karen Forsyth," Maya said. "She was named in the discharge protocols. I looked it up this morning." Linda looked at her sideways. "You looked it up?" "I like to know the structure. I'm working inside," Maya said. "I always have." At 8:45, Dr. Marcus Grant arrived on the floor. He was 15 minutes earlier than his usual start, which Maya noted, and he came directly to the nurse's station rather than to his office first, which she also noted. He looked like a man who had slept poorly and made his peace with it. He stopped beside her and looked at the board. He said without preamble, "They took Hale at 3 in the morning. Karen Forsyth called me at 4. I've been on the phone with the board since 5. He paused. "The letter of reprimand in your file has been withdrawn. Forsyth voided it this morning pending a review of Hale's administrative decisions over the past 60 days. Maya looked at the board. "Thank you for telling me." "I'm not telling you as a kindness," he said. "I'm telling you because I owe you an accurate picture of where you stand." He turned to look at her directly, the first time he had done that, without cruelty in it since she arrived. "You knew something was wrong in this building before I did. I am a man who has spent 15 years in this unit and I missed it. And you, with 2 weeks on the floor, walked in and within days had the picture clearer than anyone." He stopped. His jaw worked once. "I don't know what to do with that." She looked at him. She thought about 2 weeks of being called the ghost and the trainee and sweetheart. She thought about the clipboard on the floor on her very first shift. She thought about the OR and the needle in her hand and the hiss of air and his face at the edge of her sightline, still and unhelpful, and she thought about how much easier it would be right now to let the weight of all of that sit between them like a wall. She said, "You could start by just doing the work. That's all I ever wanted to do." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "That's a more generous answer than I gave you." "I know," she said. "That's the difference." She walked back to her patient. At 9:58, Ethan Carter walked through the main entrance of St. Helena Military Hospital. She saw him from across the lobby before he saw her. He was in civilian clothes, moving carefully, not slowly. Carefully the way a man moves when he is managing something physical without showing it. He had a folder under one arm and the look of someone with a specific destination and a specific purpose. He saw her at the same moment she stepped toward him, and she watched him make the same assessment of her that she was making of him, the fast, quiet rate of a person who has learned to take in someone's whole state in a single look. You look like you didn't sleep, he said. I look fine, she said. You look fine and you didn't sleep. She almost smiled. The debrief is on the fourth floor, she said. Forsyth cleared a conference room. I know. He fell into step beside her as they moved toward the elevator. How was the morning? Grant apologized, or something close to it. Ethan looked at her. Your kid, I don't kid about things like that. It cost him something real. He considered this. And I think he might actually be useful, she said, and meant it. In the elevator, he said quietly, the inquiry team found Fowler's connection to the leak inside the chain of command. It was a logistics coordinator at the regional command level. She had been passing schedule and personnel information to Fowler for 8 months. She thought it was for a private security contract. She didn't know what she was actually feeding, Maya said. She knew enough not to ask, he said, which was a different and more complicated thing, and they both understood that. Is it contained? Maya said. The operational leak is contained, he said carefully. She heard the qualifier. But Fowler has a network, he said. Dismantling one conduit doesn't dismantle the network. There are people who have been watching this case develop for the past 2 weeks, and those people know that things did not go the way they planned. And when things don't go the way that kind of network plans, they recalibrate. The elevator opened. He stepped out and stopped and turned to look at her. You identified Rowe through an access log review. That capability, that specific skill set is now on record as having been demonstrated by a nurse at this hospital. That is information that has value. She looked at him. I'm not trying to frighten you, he said. I know, she said. You're trying to tell me the truth. She held his eyes. I appreciate that more than you know. They looked at each other in the fourth-floor hallway, and she thought about the kitchen table in Coronado, and the 3 bags, and the door opening, and the particular way that trust is built, not in one moment, but in the accumulation of moments. Each one a small weight added to a scale until the scale tips and, she said, go do your debrief. I have patience. He nodded once and she turned and walked back toward the elevator. She was halfway down the second-floor hallway when her radio crackled. Trauma bay, level 1, all available. She was already running. She came through the trauma doors 30 seconds later and stopped. There were 3 of them. They had come in through the ambulance bay, not the main entrance, and one of them was on a gurney, and 2 of them were not, and the 2 who were not on the gurney were wearing the specific kind of civilian clothes that she had now seen enough times in the past week to know exactly what they meant. One of them had his hand pressed to his side and was not doing a good job of hiding how badly he needed it there. The man on the gurney was Garrett Fowler. He was alive. Barely. He had 2 entrance wounds, center mass, and the paramedics reading off his vitals were doing it with the clipped speed of people who are not optimistic. For a single stopped second, Maya stood in the doorway of the trauma bay and understood the full shape of what she was looking at. Fowler, the man who had identified her as a destabilizing asset, the man who had set Hale and Rowe in motion against her, the man who sat at the center of the network that had nearly gotten Ethan Carter killed, was on her table. He was her patient. She moved. She came to the side of the gurney and took his vitals herself, and she read them the way she always read them, with the full knowledge and skill of everything. She was not what she was performing for anyone in that room. And she said, I need a thoracic surgeon in here right now, and I need imaging on both wounds before anyone makes a call on the left side because the angle is wrong, and I need to know what's behind it. The 2 men in civilian clothes were watching her. She did not look at them. She looked at Garrett Fowler's gray face, and she did what she had always done, what she would always do, what was the non-negotiable center of every decision she had made since she walked through these doors 3 weeks ago. She worked. It was 22 minutes of the most focused work she had done since the night Ethan Carter was on this same table. The thoracic surgeon arrived 6 minutes in, a woman named Dr. Patricia Gow, who moved fast and listened without ego, and together they stabilized Fowler's left cavity and got him to a condition that was no longer actively dying and was something that could be called with caution survivable. When she stepped back from the table, both hands bloody to the wrists and her pulse at 130, she was aware of every person in that room looking at her again the way they had looked at her the first time. One of the 2 men in civilian clothes stepped toward her. He said, Nurse Taylor. Yes, she said, pulling off her first glove. We need to speak with you. I know, she said. She pulled off the second glove. She dropped them both in the waste bin. Give me 4 minutes. She went to the sink. She washed her hands. She watched the water run, and she breathed in 4 counts, hold 4 counts, out 4 counts, the way she had been doing in harder places for longer than most people in this building had been nurses. She thought about Ethan upstairs in a conference room being debriefed. She thought about his voice on the phone at 2:47 in the morning. She thought about what he had said about Fowler's network and recalibration and the value of a specific skill set on record. She thought about the fact that she had just saved Garrett Fowler's life, not because she was asked to, not because she was required to, not because he deserved it, which was a judgment she was not in the business of making, but because he was a patient and she was a nurse, and those two facts together were the whole of the calculus. She dried her hands. She turned off the tap. She walked back out into the trauma bay, and she said to the 2 men in civilian clothes, "All right, let's talk." They took her to a small room off the main corridor. There were 3 chairs. They sat in 2 of them. She sat in the third, and she looked at them and waited. The one on the left said, "My name is Agent Collins. This is Agent Hargrove. We're with the Defense Intelligence Agency." He put a badge on the table between them, and she looked at it and looked back at him. "We've been running the inquiry into the operation that compromised Captain Carter's unit. We're aware of your involvement in identifying the access anomaly in this hospital. We're aware of your background, the relevant background, not the background on your hospital file." She said nothing. "Garrett Fowler was shot by a member of his own network," Collins said. "Someone who had reason to believe he was going to cooperate with our inquiry in order to reduce his exposure. That makes him a witness, a living witness because of you." He paused. "And it also means that whoever ordered the shot is still active and is now aware that Fowler is alive and in this hospital." Maya looked at him steadily. "We need to move him," Hargrove said. "Tonight, quietly. We need to transfer him to a secure medical facility, and we need that transfer to look from the outside like something routine. A standard patient transport. Nothing that signals to anyone watching that we are moving a protected witness." She understood immediately. "You need a medical escort who can manage his condition in transit and who does not look like a federal escort." "We need someone who can do both," Collins said, "who is qualified to do both, who is already documented as his treating nurse at this facility and whose presence on a medical transport would not raise questions." He looked at her. "We're asking for a volunteer. This is not an order. You are a civilian nurse, and this is a request." She sat back in her chair. She thought about the 3 bags. She thought about the quiet life. She thought about the piece of paper with shaking handwriting and the 40-minute drive to Coronado and the door opening in the dark and the look on a man's face when someone shows up who wasn't asked to. She said, "What's the timeline?" "We move at midnight," Collins said. "I need to know the full medical picture on Fowler before I agree to anything. I need to see the imaging from today's procedure. I need to know what medications he's on and what his post-stabilization vitals look like." She paused. "And I need to tell Captain Carter." Collins and Hargrove exchanged a look. "Carter is being debriefed right now," Hargrove said. "He's not—" "I know where he is," she said, "and I'm not going anywhere at midnight without telling him." "That's not a negotiation." Another look between them. Collins said, "Understood." She stood up. She walked out of the room and down the corridor and took the elevator to the 4th floor, and she knocked on the door of the conference room where Ethan Carter was sitting across a table from 2 other people she didn't know, and when the door opened and he saw her face, he was on his feet before she said a single word. Because that was the thing about a man who had learned to read the difference between fine and not fine. He could see it from across a room. He could see it in a doorway. He could see it in the set of a person's jaw, and the way they were standing, and the particular quality of a silence that had something large in it. He stepped out into the hallway and pulled the door mostly closed behind him. She told him in 70 words. He listened without interrupting. When she was done, he looked at her for a long moment, and then he said, "You saved Fowler. He was my patient. I know." His voice was careful and real. "I know that's why." She looked at him. "Are you going to try to talk me out of tonight?" He thought about it honestly. She could see him thinking about it, working through it the same way she had seen him tell the truth across a kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night. He said, "No, you're the most qualified person in this building for what they're asking, and you already made your decision before you knocked on that door." She had. She said, "I'll see you on the other side of midnight." He looked at her with that honest face, the one under the default one, and he said, "I'll be here when you get back." She believed him. She turned and walked back toward the elevator, and the hospital moved around her the way it always moved, urgent and ordinary, and full of people who were hurting, and people who were helping, and people who were both at the same time. And she walked through the middle of it with her hands steady and her mind clear, and the full weight of what the night ahead was going to cost her already measured and already accepted. She had packed 3 bags once to start a new life. Tonight she was going to need to be everything the old one had made her. The rest of that day moved the way days move when you are waiting for midnight, slow in the wrong places and fast in all the ones where you needed more time. Maya worked her full shift. She checked on Mr. Delgado, who was well enough to complain about the food, which she told him was a good sign. She assisted on a post-op complication in Bay 2 that required 2 hours of focused attention and left her no room for anything except the patient in front of her, which was exactly what she needed. She did not look at the clock more than she had to. She did not let herself rehearse what was coming, because rehearsing was a form of fear dressed up as preparation, and she had learned the difference a long time ago. At 4 in the afternoon, Agent Collins found her at the medication cart and handed her a folded sheet of paper. She unfolded it without looking around. It was Fowler's post-stabilization vitals, his current medication list, and a brief surgical note from Dr. Gao. She read it in 45 seconds, folded it, and put it in her pocket. Collins said quietly, "Any concerns?" "His pressure is lower than I'd like for a ground transport," she said. "I need a unit of packed red cells available in the vehicle. And I need a direct line to a physician by phone for the duration of the transfer, not a general emergency line, a specific physician who has been briefed on his condition." Collins said, "Dr. Gao has agreed to be on call." "Good," Maya said. "Then I have no concerns." He nodded and walked away, and she turned back to the medication cart, and she heard very clearly the sound of her own heartbeat, steady and reliable, the same heartbeat that had carried her through things that had no names she was allowed to use in polite conversation, and she trusted it the way she had always trusted it completely, the way you trust something that has never once let you down, even when you gave it every reason to. At 6:15, she found Linda Shores in the break room. Linda looked up from her coffee, read her face in the way Linda always read her face, which was with an accuracy that Maya had come to rely on in a way she hadn't expected, and said, "Tonight." "Yes," Maya said. Linda set her cup down. She said, "You know I'm not going to ask you the details." "I know. And you know that if anything in this building moves the wrong way, while you're doing whatever it is you're doing, there are people on this floor who are going to handle it." Maya looked at her. "Linda, I've been here 18 years. Linda said the same way she had said it this morning, as a foundation for something. "I know where every camera blind spot in this building is. I know which orderlies are former military and which ones just look it. I know which attending physician on the night shift asks the fewest questions about things that are not his patients." She picked up her coffee cup. "So if things go sideways tonight, you are not alone in this building. That is all I am saying." Maya felt something move in her chest, something warm and complicated. The specific feeling of being seen by someone who has been watching carefully enough to actually understand what they're looking at. She said, "Thank you." Linda said, "Go home, sleep for 4 hours, eat something real." She paused, "And come back in one piece." Maya went home. She slept for 3.5 hours, which was better than nothing. She ate leftover rice that she didn't taste. She changed into dark, practical clothing, the kind that moved well and didn't announce itself. She checked her phone twice. No messages from Ethan, which meant nothing had changed, which was what she needed nothing to mean. At 11:15, she was back at St. Helena, badging through the staff entrance, moving through the building the way she had been moving through buildings like this for years, purposeful and unremarkable. The specific combination that made people's eyes slide past you. Fowler had been moved to a single room on the 3rd floor under a name that was not his name, standard protocol for protected patients. She checked on him first. He was conscious barely, And when she came into the room, he opened his eyes and looked at her with the expression of a man who knew who she was and what she had done and was not sure what to do with either of those facts. She checked his vitals without speaking. She adjusted his IV line. She was professional and thorough, and she gave him the same quality of care she gave every patient. And when she was done, she straightened up and she said, "We're going to move you at midnight. The transport is secure. Your job is to stay as still as possible and let me manage everything else." He looked at her. He said with the effort it cost him to say anything, "You know what I did." "Yes," she said. "And you still—" He stopped. "You're my patient," she said. "That doesn't change based on anything else." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Why?" She looked at him for a second. She thought about the long answer and the short answer, and she chose the one that was true without being complicated. "Because the day I start deciding which patients deserve care based on what they've done is the day I stop being a nurse," she said. "And I chose this. I'm not going to walk away from what I chose." He didn't say anything else. She walked out. At 11:40, she was in the corridor outside Fowler's room when Collins came around the corner and stopped beside her and said, "We have a problem." She looked at him. "One of Fowler's network. He's in the building." Her entire body went still. "How?" "We don't know yet. He badged in as a maintenance technician 40 minutes ago. The badge credential is stolen. We have teams moving to locate him, but the building is large, and he has a 40-minute head start." Collins was speaking quickly and evenly. "We are not aborting the transfer. We are accelerating it. We move in 8 minutes instead of at midnight." "His vitals are not ideal for a rush transfer," she said. "I know. Can you manage it?" She thought about Fowler's pressure, the IV line, the packed cells she had requested for the vehicle. She thought about managing a patient in motion in the back of a vehicle in a situation that was now tactically complicated. She thought about every time she had done it exactly this in a place with worse conditions and fewer resources. "Yes," she said, "let's go." The next 8 minutes were the fastest 8 minutes she had lived through in 2 years. Collins coordinated through an earpiece. 2 agents she had not seen before appeared at Fowler's door and transferred him to a transport gurney with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this before. Maya was at the head of the gurney managing his IV line, watching his monitor readings, calling out adjustments in a clipped, steady voice that cut through the movement without adding to its urgency. They boldly moved through the third-floor corridor toward the service elevator. At the corner, one of the agents held up a fist. They stopped. Maya felt the pause in her bones, the specific quality of a halt that means someone has seen something, and she kept her eyes on Fowler's face and his readings, and she breathed and she waited. The agent looked around the corner. He lowered his fist. They moved again. The service elevator opened. They loaded in. The doors closed. Fowler's pressure dropped 2 points in the elevator, and Maya adjusted his IV rate without looking up from the monitor. "He's dropping," she said quietly. "Nothing critical yet, but he needs to be in that vehicle in the next 4 minutes." "We're 30 seconds from the loading bay," Collins said. The elevator opened into the basement corridor. She could hear the sound of a vehicle engine running somewhere ahead. They moved fast and quiet, the gurney wheels against the floor tile, and she kept pace, one hand on the IV pole, eyes on the monitor, mind running the numbers on Fowler's condition in a continuous loop that had no room in it for anything except the patient in the next 30 seconds. They came through the loading bay doors. The vehicle was there. The back was open. She climbed in, first turned, and helped guide the gurney in, and she had both hands on Fowler and the IV line secured and the monitor reading before the doors closed behind them. She heard the vehicle start moving. She heard Collins in the front low voice coordinates. She heard the city sounds outside, ordinary night sounds. San Diego at midnight, people going home and going out and living their lives in a building that had for the past 3 weeks contained a story most of them would never know about. Fowler opened his eyes and looked at her. "Still here," she said. "Still here," he repeated faintly, and she thought that was the most honest thing she had heard him say. They were 4 minutes into the transfer when her phone buzzed. She had it in her pocket. She could not answer it. She focused on the monitor, on Fowler's breathing, on the slight instability in his pressure that she was managing with millimeter adjustments to his IV rate. It buzzed again. She pulled it out one-handed and looked at the screen without taking her other hand off the IV pole. It was Ethan. A text message. 3 words. He's behind you. She looked up from her phone. No, the maintenance technician was not in the building. He was in the vehicle. He had been in the vehicle when they loaded in. He had been in the storage partition behind the rear seats, which she knew because she could hear him now. The specific quality of a person's breath when they have been holding still for a long time and have just decided to stop, and she was moving before she had finished the thought. She put herself between Fowler's gurney and the partition with the speed of a woman whose body remembered things her mind had spent 2 years trying to put away. She heard Collins shout from the front. She heard the vehicle swerve. She heard the partition door behind her move. What happened in the next 45 seconds was something she would later describe to Ethan in the simplest possible terms, not because she couldn't remember it, but because some things are most accurately communicated without decoration. She said there was a man, he had a weapon. I took it from him. Collins secured him and Fowler's pressure stayed in range the entire time. That was the whole of it. That was not, of course, the whole of it. The whole of it was the 4 years of hand-to-hand training that lived in her muscles and not her conscious mind. The whole of it was the specific cold clarity that came over her in physical confrontations, the way the world slowed down and the target became simple, and everything outside the target became irrelevant. The whole of it was the fact that she had one hand on Fowler's IV line when it started, and both hands free 30 seconds later, and somewhere in between those two moments, there was a man with a dislocated shoulder, sitting against the rear door of a moving vehicle, while Collins reached over the seat to secure his wrists, and she was back at Fowler's side, checking his readings before the vehicle fully stopped at the side of the road for Collins to make the call. She heard Collins from the front in a voice that had the particular tight quality of a man recalibrating his understanding of something. Say, "Taylor, you good? Patient is stable," she said. "Let's keep moving." They arrived at the secure facility at 12:49 in the morning. Fowler was transferred to the medical team waiting inside, and she gave the receiving physician a full handoff, complete and precise, everything he needed to continue care and nothing he didn't need to know. When she was done, she stepped out of the transfer room and stood in the corridor and pressed her back against the wall and let herself feel it, the full physical aftershock of the last hour, the shaking that she had kept at bay through will and training, and now allowed because there was no longer a reason to hold it back. Collins appeared beside her. He looked at her for a long moment. He said, "I have been doing this for 11 years. She looked at him. "I have never seen anything like what you did in the back of that vehicle," he said. "Not from someone whose primary job title is registered nurse." She breathed out slowly. "I've had a complicated career path." He almost smiled. "I'll be writing up a full report," he said. "Your contribution to this inquiry is going to be documented." She looked at him. "I don't need documentation." "I know you don't need it," he said. "That's not why I'm doing it." He looked at her steadily. "There are people in this world whose work never gets recorded, whose names never end up attached to the things they did to keep other people safe. I've watched that happen my whole career, and I have never made peace with it." He paused. "Your name is going on this report, the real one, the sealed one, the one that goes where it needs to go." She didn't say anything for a moment. She said, "Thank you, Agent Collins." He nodded and walked away. She stood in that corridor for 2 more minutes. Then she called Ethan. He picked up on the first ring. "Are you safe?" "Yes," she said. "Fowler. Stable, in the facility. The man in the vehicle, in custody." A pause. "How did you know?" "The badge credential that was used to get into the building," he said. "I was still at the hospital when they ran the trace on it. The maintenance company it was pulled from does contract work for St. Helena and for 3 other facilities in the region, including the one the transfer vehicle was staged out of. I looked up the roster. There was a name that didn't fit the shift pattern. I called Collins, but the line was busy, so I texted you." She leaned her head back against the wall. "You texted me 3 words while I was in a moving vehicle managing a critical patient." "I knew you'd understand 3 words," he said simply. And she thought about that, the specific confidence of it, the fact that he had known she would read it correctly and act on it in time, not because he was guessing, but because he had been paying attention, the same attention she had been paying to him, and somewhere in the last 3 weeks, without either of them having a formal conversation about it, they had learned how the other one worked. She said, "I'm coming back to the hospital." "I know," he said. "I'll be here." She got back to St. Helena at 1:47 in the morning. Ethan was in the fourth floor waiting area. He stood when she came off the elevator. She looked at him and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything for a moment in the way people don't say anything when what they are feeling is larger than any sentence available to them. She said, "You look like you've been awake for 24 hours. You look like you've been in a vehicle fight," he said. She almost laughed. It came out differently than a laugh, something between exhale and emotion, and she put her hand over her mouth for a second and then took it away. "I'm fine," she said. "I know," he said. "I know you're fine." He said it the way she said it, the exact inflection she always used, and she understood he was giving it back to her on purpose. And she felt the warmth of that understanding move through her, like something she hadn't realized she was cold without. She sat down in the chair next to where he had been sitting. He sat back down. They were side by side in a waiting room at 2 in the morning, in a hospital that had spent the last 3 weeks being the site of more things than hospitals are meant to contain, and it was quiet, and she let it be quiet. After a while, he said, "What do you want to do?" She thought about it honestly. She thought about the question in its full scope, the immediate version of it, and the larger version of it, the version that was about tonight, and the version that was about everything after tonight. "I want to go back to my patients," she said. "In the morning, I want to check on Mr. Delgado, and I want to finish the week, and I want to be a nurse." She paused. "That part has not changed." "I know," he said, "but I'm not invisible anymore," she said. "That part has changed. Collins is going to put my name in a sealed report. The inquiry team knows who I am. You know who I am." She looked at him, "And I think I have to decide what to do with that." He was quiet, and she appreciated that he didn't rush to fill the silence. She said, "I came here with 3 bags and a plan to be small and quiet and far away from everything I used to be. And in 3 weeks, I've done everything except that." She paused. "I keep waiting to feel like that's a failure." "Or does it feel like a failure?" he said. She thought about it. She thought about the needle in her hand and the hiss of air and Ethan Carter's vitals steadying on the monitor. She thought about the access log and Rose's pleasant smile and Grant saying, "Be careful what doors you open." She thought about Fowler's face when she said he was her patient. She thought about the back of a vehicle and 45 seconds of something she wouldn't decorate with language. She thought about Linda Shores saying, "I've been here 18 years with the weight of everything that meant." "No," she said, "it doesn't feel like a failure." He nodded once. She looked at her hands, both of them steady now, resting on her knees. The hands that had held a needle and set a bone and adjusted an IV line and done the other thing that she was not going to name in a hospital hallway. She had spent 2 years trying to see these hands as nurses' hands and not soldiers' hands. She had been thinking about it wrong. They were her hands. They had always been her hands. The things they could do were not in conflict with each other. They were the same hands doing the same thing which was keeping people alive. She said, "Fowler asked me why I saved him, given what he did." Ethan looked at her. "I told him because I chose this," she said, "and I don't walk away from what I choose." He was quiet for a moment, and she could see him turning that sentence over the way she turned things over slowly with full attention. He said, "That might be the most accurate thing I've ever heard anyone say about themselves." She looked at him. "You're not so bad yourself for a man with 2 healing chest wounds who stayed awake all night watching a vehicle trace." "I was worried," he said simply and without apology. She held his eyes. "I know," she said. "I was glad." At 4 in the morning, Linda Shores came onto the floor for the start of her shift and found Maya at the nurse's station writing up her notes from the night. Linda stopped. She looked at Maya. She looked at the notes. She poured herself a coffee from the station pot. She said, "All in one piece." "All in one piece," Maya confirmed. "Good." Linda sat down in the chair across from him. "Grant called in a favor with the board this morning, before all of this happened. He pulled the request for the 2-week reassignment before Forsyth could even rule on it. Said it was a unilateral administrative error and his name shouldn't have been on it." Maya looked up from her notes. "He also told Forsyth that in his professional assessment, the trauma unit would benefit from keeping you in your current role and that any review of your conduct in the Carter case should be closed without action." Linda sipped her coffee. "He didn't tell her he was doing it. He just did it." Maya looked at her notes for a moment. She said, "He's still not an easy man." "No," Linda agreed, "but he's an honest one. Sometimes that takes longer to show up than it should. At 6:30 in the morning, Karen Forsyth called a brief staff assembly in the main corridor and addressed what had happened over the past several days with the specific corporate neutrality of a woman who had been handed an enormous mess and had decided to clean it up methodically and without drama. She spoke about Hale's removal, about the administrative review that was underway, about the hospital's commitment to the integrity of its patient care processes. She said the trauma unit had distinguished itself during a difficult period and that its staff had demonstrated the kind of professionalism the institution stood on. She did not say Maya Taylor's name. Maya had not expected her to. That was fine. She had not done any of it for her name to be said. At 7:15, she was doing her morning rounds when she passed Captain Ethan Carter, still waiting in the fourth floor area, now talking quietly on his phone. He looked up when she passed. She kept walking. He said something brief into the phone and ended the call. He fell into step beside her. She said, "You should go home and sleep." "I'll go home when you go home," he said. "I have 3 more hours on this shift." "I know," he said. "I'll wait." She stopped walking and looked at him. He looked back at her, steady and direct, the honest face, the one under the default face, the one she had learned to trust in the accumulation of kitchen tables and late phone calls and 2 in the morning messages in this hallway right now. She said, "This is a complicated life I'm offering you access to." "I have a complicated life too," he said. "I think they might fit." She looked at him for a moment. She said, "Don't be late," and walked back to her patients. 3 hours later, she finished her last chart, clocked out at the nurse's station, and said goodbye to Linda, who waved without looking up from her own charts, the specific wave of a person who plans to see you tomorrow and the day after that, and does not feel the need to make it a moment. Ethan was in the lobby. They walked out of St. Helena Military Hospital together on a Tuesday morning in San Diego, into a day that was ordinary and clear, and full of people who had no idea what the building behind them had contained. She had 3 bags in her car, and a life she had built from scratch, and a name in a sealed report that nobody would read for years except the people who needed to, and a man walking beside her who had opened a door in Coronado one night expecting nothing and found her standing there with all of it. She had come to San Diego to be small and quiet and invisible. She had become something else entirely, not instead of who she chose to be, but in addition to it, all of it true at the same time. The nurse and the soldier and the woman who showed up with 3 bags because a mother's voice had been shaking on the phone and she had known what to do. Some people spend their whole lives trying to leave behind the strongest version of themselves, not understanding that strength carried with love is not a burden but a gift, and the quiet life and the necessary life are not always different lives at all. Maya Taylor had figured that out in 3 weeks in a trauma unit in San Diego, and she was not going to forget it. She got in her car, she drove home. She was exactly who she had always been, and finally completely at peace with all of it.